What if I told you the world's most secretive brotherhoods were never protecting rituals, symbols, or secret handshakes at all? For thousands of years, the mystery schools of ancient Egypt, the philosophers initiated in Greece, the Rosicrucians who quietly reshaped Europe's inner life, and the Freemasons who carved 33 separate degrees into one path, none of them taught people how to get rich or gain power over others. They taught something far more dangerous to hand to the wrong person: how a human being learns to govern reality itself. Today, every ritual, every symbol, every degree sits printed openly online, free for anyone to read. Almost no one who reads it ever uses it, because the real secret was never the ceremony. It was the mechanism hidden underneath it, a map quietly passed from one initiate to the next, showing exactly how the inside of a person becomes the outside of their life. You are already standing somewhere on that map right now, whether anyone ever showed you the lines. By the time this is over, you will know exactly which part of it your own hand is already resting on. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. It is the exhaustion of living two lives inside one body. The life you keep repeating out of habit, and the life you can already picture. The one where you stop reacting and start choosing. You have felt both versions of yourself in the same week, maybe in the same afternoon. Most people assume that gap will close on its own, given enough time. It rarely does. You check the bank balance again, half expecting a different number, and find the same one. You catch yourself reacting to the same person, the same comment, the same small disappointment, in exactly the way you promised yourself you had already outgrown. That gap is exactly what the old schools were mapping. In ancient Egypt, the mystery schools taught one idea before anything else. Nearly everyone moves through their entire life asleep, unaware of the machinery running underneath their own choices, and that sleep can end. Waking up was treated as an actual skill, not a metaphor. Something trained deliberately, the same way a body is trained through repetition, not something that arrives on its own with age. And these schools were never open to just anyone who wandered in curious. Entry was earned slowly because the teaching itself was considered too disruptive to hand to someone who was not ready to be responsible for it. Centuries later, in Greece, the Hermetic teachers reduced an entire philosophy down to 2 words, carved above a temple door: know thyself. Not because self-knowledge was a pleasant idea to meditate on, because it was treated as the starting condition for everything a person could become afterward. The Kybalion, the text that later collected these Hermetic principles into writing, states plainly that the universe itself is mental, that consciousness is not some byproduct sitting inside reality. It is the material reality is made from. Early Christian mystics arrived at something strikingly close, from a completely different direction, with no historical contact between the two traditions. Their central teaching was never about a distant heaven, reached only after death, handed out as a reward for good behavior. It was that the kingdom is within you, already present, already available, waiting to be recognized, not earned. And centuries after that, the Freemasons built an entire structure of 33 degrees around the same underlying idea, except they measured it differently. Each degree was never a reward for memorizing more information. It marked a stage of moral and symbolic development. Who the person had actually become was the real credential, not what they had managed to learn by heart. 4 traditions, 4 different centuries, languages and continents with no meaningful contact between them, and they kept landing on the exact same floor. Change the person, and reality responds by rearranging itself around who that person has become. This is not a comforting idea if you happen to be the one still waiting for your life to rearrange itself. You have probably already tried changing your thoughts, maybe your habits, maybe your morning routine, your affirmations, the people you spend your time around, and some of it worked a little for a while, before the old life quietly pulled you back into its familiar rhythm. That is not proof you did it wrong. It is not a character flaw, and it is not evidence that you are somehow the exception to all of this. Trying to build a calmer, more abundant life on top of an identity that still expects scarcity and disappointment is like repainting a room whose foundation was never touched. The paint looks different for a while. The walls still crack in the same places. It usually means you changed a behavior without touching the identity underneath it. And identity, according to every one of these traditions, was the only thing that ever had the power to move reality in the first place. There is one more piece the old teachers insisted on, one that most modern versions of this idea quietly leave out. It was never simply belief in the casual sense of the word. It had to be a very specific kind of belief, undivided, unshaken, whole in a way the average person has never once experienced toward anything. And what that particular kind of conviction is actually capable of producing is stranger and considerably more documented in real history than anything you have ever been told about secret societies. There is a difference between wanting something and deciding it, and almost nobody is taught where that line actually sits. You can want a different bank account, a different relationship, a different body for years, and still carry a second voice underneath the wanting that keeps insisting it probably will not happen. Not for you, not yet. That second voice is not a character flaw. It is what the old traditions called a divided mind, and every one of them treated it as the actual obstacle, not the circumstances doing the dividing. The 19th century philosopher and psychologist William James spent much of his career studying exactly this fracture. His central argument was that belief is not a passive report on reality, something that simply arrives once enough evidence has piled up. Belief, in his framework, works closer to an act of will, a decision the mind makes and then defends, often long before the proof exists to justify it. A divided mind, in James's terms, is a mind still negotiating with its own decision. A unified mind has already closed the negotiation and stopped asking for permission. You already know what a divided mind feels like from the inside, even if nobody ever gave it that name. It is the version of you that sends the hopeful text and then reads it back 4 times. Certain something in the wording gave away how much you wanted a particular reply. It is the version that applies for the raise, or starts the business, or finally says the hard thing out loud in the relationship, while quietly building a backup story for why it will probably fall through. None of that makes you weak. It means the decision was made out loud, in words, while the deeper agreement underneath it never actually signed on. This is not only a philosopher's abstraction. You can watch the difference play out historically in one of the more unlikely outcomes in recorded military history. In 1776, a coalition of farmers, tradesmen, and volunteer militia, without a professional army, without naval power, without reliable financing, took on the largest, best-funded empire on the planet. Several of the men organizing that resistance, including Benjamin Franklin and a number of officers close to Washington, had been formally initiated into Masonic lodges. Lodges that taught undivided conviction as a trained discipline, not a personality trait some men are simply born with. Discipline like that does not stay theoretical for long. An army with a divided, uncertain relationship to its own cause does not hold together through a winter like Valley Forge. Something kept a starving, under-equipped force believing in an outcome that, on paper, looked close to impossible. And it held. Not because farmers with muskets are naturally more resilient than trained soldiers, because a mind that has actually closed the argument with itself will keep a body moving through conditions that would stop a mind still arguing. You do not need an empire to overthrow to feel the same fracture at a much smaller scale. The average person's relationship with their own goals looks less like conviction and more like a hostage negotiation, half of them pushing forward, half of them already rehearsing the explanation for why it probably will not work out this time either. That split is expensive. It is the real reason so much effort spent on personal growth produces so little visible change in an actual life. The actions get unified. New habits, new routines, a new morning ritual. The belief underneath them stays exactly as divided as it always was. This is where I want to stop speaking in philosophy and start being specific, because vague inspiration has never once changed anyone's bank account, marriage, or health. Across the Egyptian mystery schools, the Hermetic teachings, the early Christian mystics, and everything the Masonic tradition encoded into those 33 degrees, the same 5 underlying principles keep resurfacing. Different language, different century, the same shape underneath. I want to walk you through what I believe are the 5 central laws hidden inside that map, not as history you file away and forget by tomorrow, as something you can actually put to use this week, in your own home, with your own life, exactly as it stands right now. Law number 1 is the power of decision. And before it means anything practical, it requires unlearning something nearly all of us were taught by accident: that a belief is a fact you discovered about yourself, instead of a decision you made and then forgot you made. Think about the ones you carry right now. That money is hard to keep. That love eventually disappoints. That your body will betray you the way it betrayed someone else in your family. None of these arrived with evidence attached. They arrived early, usually before you had the vocabulary to argue back. Built from a handful of moments, a child's mind turned into a permanent verdict. A parent's stress about a bill became, "There is never enough." One betrayal became, "People always leave eventually." That was never weakness. A child's mind reaching for meaning in confusing moments is doing exactly what it was built to do. It just never got told the verdict could be revisited. Neville Goddard, the mystic teacher whose work still shapes most of what gets called manifestation today, built his entire teaching around a single radical instruction: live from the end, not hope for the outcome. Occupy it now in feeling before any evidence arrives to justify it. James Allen said something that lands in the same place from a quieter angle, that a person's thoughts are the seed and the circumstances of a life are simply the harvest those seeds were always going to produce. Both men were describing the same mechanism the Egyptian schools, the Hermetics, and early scripture all pointed at. In Genesis, the very first act recorded is a decision spoken into a formless dark: "Let there be light." and light is simply what answered. Not a miracle exempt from the pattern, the first demonstration of it. So here is the part most personal growth advice skips entirely. You do not decide what to do. You decide what something means and what kind of reality you are willing to accept as true from now on. That single shift changes three things almost immediately. The first is what you think, automatically, without effort. A decided mind stops debating the same argument every morning. The second is what you notice. There is a part of the brain, the reticular activating system, that filters an almost unmanageable flood of information down to a small slice you can actually register, and it selects based on relevance you have already defined, consciously or not. It is the exact reason a woman who just found out she is pregnant suddenly sees strollers, baby clothes, and pregnant bellies everywhere in a world that did not just fill up with babies overnight. The filter changed. The world did not. Decide that opportunity is common, and you begin noticing the version of reality that was always there, just previously filtered out as irrelevant. The third is harder to explain and easier to notice after the fact. A held decision starts producing timing that feels too specific to be random. The call that arrives right when you needed it. The person who appears at the exact moment their help mattered most. Call it coincidence if that word helps you sleep at night. It keeps happening anyway, to people who have actually closed the argument with themselves. Here is where it gets practical instead of philosophical. If you are short on money right now, the instinct is to obsess over the number. The old teachings point somewhere else entirely, toward the decision underneath the number. Not, "I will have more money," said like a hopeful wish thrown at the ceiling. Something closer to, "Money moves toward me easily, and I am someone who is trusted with it," said flatly, the way you would state your own name. You are not asked to force that belief into existence tonight. You are asked to do something smaller first and considerably more honest. Notice one decision you have been living inside without ever choosing it on purpose. Not to fix it yet, just to see it clearly enough to say, out loud if you are willing, "I decided this once, I can decide again." That noticing is where every one of the old traditions actually began, not with the outcome, with a person willing to look at their own mind long enough to see it was theirs to command in the first place. Which raises an uncomfortable question, none of them left unanswered for long. If your decisions built the reality you are standing in, what exactly built your decisions? What built your decisions is the same thing your decisions keep rebuilding: your identity. Not identity in the sense of a personality test result, a fixed set of traits printed on a card. Identity, in the sense the old traditions meant it, is closer to a running total. The sum of every thought you rehearse without noticing, every belief you never got around to questioning, every emotional tone that has become so familiar it stopped registering as a mood and started registering as just who you are. That total does not stay quietly inside you. It leaks into every room you walk into, every decision you make under pressure, every reaction you have before you've had time to choose one. Law number 2 is this: your identity is not shaped by your life. Your life is shaped by your identity, running on repeat, largely unsupervised. The biologist Bruce Lipton spent years studying something that sounds almost too simple to matter. Cells do not respond to their actual environment. They respond to their perception of it. Change what a cell perceives, and it changes its physical behavior before anything in its surroundings has actually changed. His research was about biology, not manifestation, but the implication reaches further than a lab. A nervous system operates the same way. It does not organize itself around the life you are hoping for. It organizes itself around the life it currently perceives as real, familiar, and safe, which is very often an old life, still running the show long after you stopped consciously choosing it. So here is a question worth sitting with longer than it feels comfortable to. If you had already reached the thing you are working toward right now, the income, the relationship, the recovered health, how would you actually think in ordinary, forgettable moments? How would you feel on a Tuesday that had nothing special happening in it? How would you carry your body walking into a room? So many people picture the outcome in vivid detail and skip straight past this part, the only part that is actually usable. Take money, since it is where this shows up most obviously. Ask most people what they would feel once they finally had enough, and the honest answer is calm, relaxed, unbothered by a number on a screen. And then watch what they actually do while waiting for that number to arrive. Checking the account with a tight chest. Opening the banking app already braced for bad news. Treating every bill like a small emergency. They are waiting for money to hand them a feeling they could just as easily be practicing for free, starting today, with nothing in the account yet to justify it. The same pattern shows up in relationships, just wearing different clothes. Someone who has quietly decided, somewhere back in childhood or a bad relationship, that they are too much or not enough, does not need a partner to confirm that story out loud. They will read a delayed text as proof, a distracted evening as evidence, a small disagreement as the beginning of the end, long before any of it was ever actually decided by the other person. The identity gets there first and edits the evidence to match. This is not paranoia, and it is not your fault for noticing patterns your nervous system learned to watch for on purpose, once, for good reason. It is simply the running total, doing exactly what running totals do. That is the actual invitation inside law number 2, and it is smaller and more immediate than it sounds. Not manifest the money. Rehearse the calm now, on purpose, before the evidence shows up to make it easy. The calm was never the reward for the money arriving. It is closer to the signal that tells your nervous system the money is no longer a threat to prepare for. So take the decision you noticed earlier, the one you named without judging it. Now go further. Choose one specific moment today. Checking your phone, walking into a hard conversation, opening an email you've been avoiding, and for just that moment, act from the feeling of the version of you who already handled this 100 times before, not performed for anyone watching. Practiced privately, the way you would rehearse a language you actually intend to speak fluently one day, not just recognize on a page. Do that consistently, and something strange starts to happen, something the old traditions were careful to warn their students about in advance. The world outside you does not rearrange itself on the same afternoon you rehearse the feeling. It takes its time catching up. And that lag is exactly where so many people give up right before anything was ever going to show. Somewhere around the 3rd or 4th day of actually doing this, deciding on purpose, rehearsing the calm before the money shows up, catching a reaction half a second before it runs the whole show. A very reasonable voice shows up with a complaint that deserves a real answer, not a slogan. None of this has actually changed anything yet. The bank account looks the same. The relationship still feels the same. You did the internal work, and reality did not get the memo. The old traditions had already accounted for this exact moment, and they built an entire law around it, not as damage control for people who were doing it wrong, but as something every serious student was told to expect from the start. Law number 3, the echo effect. Here is the part that reframes the whole complaint. What you are living in right now is not today's news. It is the delayed echo of decisions, emotions, and beliefs you were running weeks, months, sometimes years ago. Reality has a lag built into it. It is not indifferent to the new decision. It simply has not finished catching up to it yet. Which means the discouraging evidence sitting in front of you right now was never proof the new decision failed. It is proof of how convincingly the old one used to work. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus built his entire teaching around a single sharp distinction. Some things are within your control, and everything else is not worth a single ounce of your attention. What already happened, the bill that already arrived, the reaction someone already had toward you last week, sits entirely outside your control the moment it becomes the past. Wrestling with it, replaying it, treating it as a verdict on where you're headed, spends energy on a fight that was already decided before you showed up to it. The only thing still within your control is the decision you are making right now, in this exact moment, about what happens next. Epictetus would have called the echo a fact. He would have called your reaction to it a choice every single time. This is why, for a while, you are technically living in two realities at once. One foot is still standing in the reality your old thoughts and old emotions already built, the one still finishing its playback. The other foot is standing in a reality your new decision is quietly constructing, one that has not caught up to visible yet. This in-between stretch is the least comfortable part of the entire process, and also the part nobody warns you about in advance, because it is much easier to sell a before and after than an uncomfortable middle. Picture a specific Tuesday. You wake up and the exact same worry is sitting there waiting, the one you supposedly already dealt with. Your instinct is to panic, to conclude the new decision didn't take, to reach for the old identity because at least it's familiar and it never demanded patience. That reaching back is the actual danger here, not the echo itself, which was always going to fade on its own timeline, but abandoning the new decision the moment the old evidence shows up one more time to argue its case. So here is where the discipline actually lives, and it is considerably harder than anything asked of you so far. When the old pattern surfaces again today, the bounced check, the cold reply, the fear you thought you'd already outgrown, do not treat it as a referendum on whether any of this is working. Let it be exactly what it is, an echo, not a verdict. Return calmly to the decision and the identity you already chose without needing the echo to agree with you first. You are not required to convince the past. You are only required to keep outlasting it. So many people never get told this part exists, which is precisely why they quit 2 Tuesdays before anything would have shown. And there is one more reason so many people quit exactly here, in the middle of the echo, that has nothing to do with willpower. They are trying to outlast it entirely alone, holding an unfamiliar identity together with no one around them reflecting it back as normal. Which is strange when you consider that almost none of the traditions we've talked about were ever designed to be practiced by a single person in a room by themselves. Trying to hold a new identity together completely alone is not just hard, It goes against something the old traditions treated as load-bearing to the entire practice, not optional decoration around the edges of it. The writer Napoleon Hill spent over 20 years interviewing the most successful people of his era for what became Think and Grow Rich, and one of his most repeated findings had almost nothing to do with money directly. He noticed that when a small group of people, aligned around the same honest intention, meet regularly and speak plainly with each other, something starts happening in that room that none of them could produce sitting alone in a house at night. He called it the mastermind principle, a kind of intelligence that only exists in the space between committed people, not inside any single one of them. This is not a new observation wearing modern language. A much older teaching says it plainly, "Where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them." Same idea, older voice. Presence multiplies where genuine agreement exists, and it does not multiply by simple addition. You have already felt a thin version of this, even if nobody named it at the time. Showing up for something difficult got noticeably easier the moment one other person in the room was also actually trying, not performing effort, actually trying. A workout partner who shows up even on the day you wanted to cancel. A room of people in early recovery where a single sentence lands differently than it ever could from a book. A friend who calls at the exact hour your resolve was quietly caving in without knowing that's what the call interrupted. Most of what we have covered so far, though, tends to get practiced in the most isolating way possible. A journal filled out alone in bed, a decision rehearsed silently in a car before walking into a job you're trying to outgrow, an identity being quietly reconstructed with absolutely no one around to notice the reconstruction, let alone confirm it's real. That isolation is not a personality preference for introverts. It is often the actual reason the echo from law number 3 lasts longer than it needs to. There is no second voice in the room to remind you, on the hard Tuesday, which version of yourself you already decided to become. It is also true, and worth saying directly instead of dancing around, that some of the most powerful institutions in modern history were built by small groups of aligned people using this exact principle deliberately, which is precisely where a lot of understandable suspicion about closed rooms and quiet agreements comes from. But the principle itself was never the problem. A shared fire will warm a room or burn down a house, depending entirely on what it's pointed at and who is tending it. The same gathering effect that has built systems of control throughout history can just as easily build a system of support. And the second one has always been available to anyone willing to actually sit in the room and stay honest in it. You do not need 33 degrees or a founding charter to use this law. You need 1 or 2 people in real and regular contact who already know exactly which identity you are practicing right now, and who will notice, out loud, the moment you start quietly sliding back toward the old one. Not people who agree with everything you say. People who remember, on the days you forget, which version of you actually showed up to build this. It rarely needs to be large to work. 2 people rebuilding their finances who check in with each other weekly, honestly, about the actual numbers instead of the performance of doing well. A small group of people all trying to leave a pattern of relationships behind, willing to say the hard sentence out loud before it turns into another repeated mistake. The size of the room was never the mechanism. The honesty inside it was. Because there is a second reason this matters, one that has nothing to do with support and everything to do with proof. The people around you do not just witness your new identity. Eventually, they start reflecting it back at you, sometimes before you can see it clearly yourself, which raises an uncomfortable question about everyone and everything else already reflecting something back at you, whether you invited them to or not. Everything reflecting something back at you, whether invited or not, is not a metaphor for this final law. It is the law itself. Law number 5. The outside world functions as a mirror, and the part worth watching is never the event. It is your reaction to it. So many people run this backward without noticing. Something happens. A delayed reply, a canceled plan, a comment that landed wrong, and the attention goes straight to the event, litigating it, replaying it, building a case against the person or the circumstance responsible. The old traditions pointed somewhere else entirely, not at what happened, at the exact shape of the reaction it triggered, because that shape was already sitting inside you before the event ever gave it a stage to perform on. Carl Jung spent decades studying this same mechanism from a psychological angle, describing how the parts of ourselves we refuse to look at directly do not simply disappear. They get projected outward, dressed up as other people's flaws, other people's cruelty, other people's inconvenient timing. A sudden flash of anger at someone else's carelessness often has very little to do with their carelessness, and a great deal to do with an old wound around not being taken seriously, one that never got looked at directly enough to heal. The world did not manufacture that reaction. It simply gave it a place to surface. The Kybalion states the same idea even more directly, as a working principle rather than a psychological theory. As above, so below. As within, so without. Whatever is expressing itself out in your circumstances can be traced back to a root already living inside you. That is not a punishment. It is closer to a diagnostic tool, quietly available every single day, usually disguised as an inconvenience. Here is what that actually looks like in practice. Someone cancels on you last minute, and underneath the disappointment sits a familiar, older ache. I am easy to deprioritize. A business idea gets rejected, and underneath the sting sits an older verdict. I was never quite good enough to be taken seriously in the first place. The event is real. The size of the reaction to it is information about something considerably older than the event itself. None of this makes you dramatic or fragile or too sensitive for your own good, which is usually the quiet accusation people carry underneath their own reactions. A nervous system that flinches at rejection learned to flinch for a reason once, probably a long time before you had any say in the matter. The mirror is not interested in shaming you for that. It is simply the most honest feedback system you will ever have access to, running for free every single day, whether you choose to read it or not. Mastery, in this fifth law, is not becoming a person nothing ever bothers. It is using every one of these moments as raw material, noticing the resentment before defending it, noticing the fear before justifying it, and asking, honestly, what belief just got confirmed by that reaction? Yogic traditions built an entire embodied practice around training exactly this. Deliberately hold an uncomfortable posture, the kind your body immediately wants out of, and instead of tensing against it or abandoning it, breathe through the discomfort on purpose. Let the impulse to react rise fully and let it pass, without acting on it. Not suppressing the feeling, simply refusing to let it drive. That same breath is available the next time reality hands you something small to react to. A slow reply, a short answer from someone you love, the bounced check, the fear you thought you'd already outgrown. Feel the reaction rise. In that specific place in your chest it always shows up. Before saying or doing anything on its behalf, take the one full breath and ask it plainly what it's actually afraid is true about you. Most of the time, if you're willing to actually listen instead of already defending yourself, it answers. The less reactive you become to what the mirror shows you, the less that particular reflection has any reason left to keep showing up. Which brings the 5 laws to the same place they've been quietly pointing all along, and to a question worth sitting with before we go any further. Not what you learned here today, but what you are actually willing to do with it starting tonight. 5 laws in one sitting is a lot to hold, and if some of it already feels like too much to remember by tomorrow morning, that is not a sign you're missing something everyone else already has figured out. Nobody runs all 5 of these perfectly, every day on the first attempt. Plenty of people who actually change something real about their life started by doing one of these badly, on purpose, before they ever did it well. The psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, writing about what he had survived and still managed to carry meaning out of, said that everything can be taken from a person except one final freedom: the ability to choose your own response to whatever happens to you. That single freedom is what all 5 of these laws have actually been describing from 5 different angles the entire time. Not 5 separate techniques competing for your attention. One continuous practice, wearing 5 different names depending on which part of the day it's needed. Here is what that looks like stitched together. Instead of scattered across 5 different ideas you'd have to remember separately. In the morning, before the day has had a chance to hand you its usual evidence, you make the decision, not a wish, a decision, about what today means and what kind of person is living it. Through the day, you practice the identity that decision implies, rehearsing the calm or the confidence before anything external has earned it yet. When the old pattern shows up anyway, the bounced reply, the tight chest, the familiar disappointment, you recognize it as an echo finishing its playback, not a verdict on whether any of this is real. You let someone else in on what you're actually building instead of carrying the whole reconstruction silently, because the old teachers were specific about this part never working well alone. And at night, you look at whatever reaction the day pulled out of you, and you ask it, honestly, what it was actually protecting, instead of blaming the day for provoking it. Picture someone specific instead of the idea in the abstract. A woman rebuilding her relationship with money after a divorce that emptied out more than just an account. Her morning decision is quiet, almost boring. Money moves toward me easily now, and I am someone who is trusted with it. By early afternoon, an old bill arrives that would have once sent her into a full afternoon of dread. This time, she notices the tightening in her chest, names it as the echo of a marriage that trained her to expect financial disaster around every corner, and keeps her hand steady while she pays it anyway. That evening, she texts the one friend who already knows exactly which version of herself she is practicing, not to be rescued, just to say it out loud to someone other than herself. And before sleep, she catches the resentment that flared at her ex earlier that day, and asks it plainly what it was actually protecting instead of letting it write the story of her whole night. Nothing dramatic happened in her day. That is precisely the point. The 5 laws were never meant to arrive as a single, cinematic turnaround. They arrive as a slightly different way of moving through a completely ordinary Tuesday, repeated enough times that the ordinary Tuesdays themselves start looking different. Decide, embody, endure the echo, stay witnessed, reflect. 5 words, 1 rhythm, repeating daily until it stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like who you actually are. If this is the kind of thing that helps you think more clearly about your own life, this channel exists specifically to keep going deeper into it, 1 law and 1 pattern at a time. Subscribe now so you don't lose the thread between this one and the next. None of this, though, changes the hardest part of the whole practice, the part nobody can hand you in a single video, no matter how carefully it's explained. Actually seeing which old decisions are still quietly running your life underneath the ones you think you've already made. Most people cannot see that clearly from the inside, for the same reason you cannot smell your own house. You've been standing inside it for years. This is exactly why, underneath this video, there is a short, free assessment we built for precisely this problem, a way to see, in plain language, the 3 decisions most likely still running quietly beneath the life you are actually trying to leave. Not a horoscope, not a personality quiz. Closer to a mirror held up by someone standing outside the house you cannot smell from inside it. The link is waiting below whenever you're ready to actually use it, not just save it for later. If something already shifted while you were listening, a decision you're finally willing to make differently, an old identity you're done defending, that is worth more sitting quietly in your own head. Say it here, plainly. Tell me exactly what moved, even if it's 1 sentence, even if you're still not entirely sure you believe it yet. That sentence, typed honestly, is usually the first real decision of the 5. And if this earned a few extra minutes of your evening, stay, subscribe, so the next law finds you instead of you having to go looking for it. If there are 5 people in your life still quietly living inside a version of themselves they already outgrew, send this to them today. Not as a favor to me. As the mastermind principle, in practice, the same one we already talked about, the fastest way any of this ever spreads is 1 person deciding another person deserved to hear it too. Tell me, too, which of these 5 laws you want taken further next, or which old pattern you're finally ready to understand instead of just survive. Because here, finally, is the answer to the question this entire video opened with. What were all those schools and lodges and quiet initiations actually protecting? Across every century, someone tried to stamp them out. Not a ritual, not a handshake, not even a forbidden book. They were protecting 1 plain fact, hidden in plain sight the entire time. You were never simply living inside your life. You were writing it, 1 decision at a time, usually without ever noticing your own hand on the pen. You already know how to feel it in your hand now. The only real question left is what you're going to write next.